Previously on 5 Points of Articulation. I could totally see McFarlane reusing this body for an all-star Batman and Robin version of Dick Grayson 13 days later. Called it. Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation and the end of our epic Top 10 of 2022 journey. Throughout the month, we've showcased some of the best figures of the year. Today, it's time to spotlight the worst. It should go without saying that this is the most subjective list so far, and it's based only on figures I personally bought and didn't like. There were probably dozens, if not hundreds of figures last year that were way worse than the ones on this list, but I didn't buy those. In general, I don't buy figures I don't like unless I need to complete a Build-A-Figure or something like that. I don't like to be negative. I prefer to only collect things I can feel positive about. But sometimes you just get let down. So instead of looking at this as the top 10 worst figures of the year, I'd rather look at it as my personal Hall of Shame. Number 10, Ragnarok. Every so often, a toy company needs to find a clever way of getting a character back into circulation. Ragnarok here was an attempt at doing that for the 80 Years Thor, while also providing a completely different character from the comic. But notice how I use the word attempt. They did include an alternate fleshy hand, but the alternate head had evil red eyes and a crack in the helmet. As such, if you wanted to make this a regular Thor, you'd have to paint it yourself and swap the helmets. If the point was to give fans an extra attempt at getting Thor without paying aftermarket prices, this is needlessly complicated. It does come with a super awesome spinning hammer effect, but if you don't already have the 80 Years Thor, all this set's gonna do is make you wish you did. Number 9, the Conchi Wave Red Skull. I did see some comments suggesting that this wave should have been included in my top 10 of 2022. I, however, argued that it was too close to the new year and that I was going to count it as 2023. Unfortunately, I then checked the box and it does clearly say 2022 on it. What does that mean for the top 10 list I already made? Nothing. But hey, it gives me a chance to complain about it again, so I guess that's a plus. I don't like to be negative. For those who haven't seen my video yet, long story short, this is a $25 figure who has nothing new except for a head, and the only accessory it comes with other than a Build-A-Figure piece is a Tesseract we've got many times before. Combined with limited articulation, and this leader of Hydra is going to have to try a little bit harder if he wants me to hail him. Number 8, The Dark Knight Returns Joker. For comics and animation, there's this thing called being either on model or off model. Garfield, for example, looks the exact same in every panel of every comic because, well, he's on model. The artwork of The Dark Knight Returns is off model. The characters look a little bit different from panel to panel depending on what Frank Miller was trying to convey, but the gist was always there. That said, at no point did the Joker ever look like this. Did the Joker wear a jacket with a texture like this? Yeah, but it was a completely different color. Did he wear a white suit? Yes, but it was all white. It wasn't white and cream. Point being that there were just enough little things wrong with it to really stand out, and if I wasn't trying to complete the Build-A-Figure horse, I would have never bought him at all. Number 7, the Ninja Turtles from the Street Fighter vs. Ninja Turtles 2-packs. Let me just start by saying that while I don't think that the Ryu and Chun-Li that came with them were spectacular, I thought that they were okay. Let me also say that I don't hate these turtle bodies as much as everybody else does. Granted, it was also my first time with them. I really like the diaphragm joint, and I'm honestly pretty impressed with their range. Articulation-wise, the only things I didn't like were the articulated fingers and the articulated toes. The reason why they're on this list? The shading. I'm not opposed to the shading in general. I actually do think it was pretty well done. If only there was, more of it. Hopefully we can at least all agree that these blacked out lips and teeth are nightmare-inducing. If this was a Mirage collection with other comic characters, I think it would have made a lot of sense, but pairing obviously comic-style characters with video game-style characters simply does not work. The result were heroes in a half shell that felt more like half an effort. Number 6, Iceman from Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. For one thing, it's cel-shaded when the other figures aren't. The argument, of course, is that they did that to mimic how he looked in the show, but if they cared so much about preserving the integrity of the show's design, then how can you explain this hideous head? Or the use of the Pizza Spidey body? The Sunfire mold they used for the retro card would have been fine, except for one thing. Peter and Angelica here are completely pinless. Pizza Spidey, however, is not. Although it occurs to me that these are the exact same head, which is why it looks so weird on this smaller body. Hey, ever wonder what it would be like if Iceman was played by John Malkovich? If only there was a more angular body made specifically for Iceman that they could have used. In no way does it feel like these three figures belong together. It wouldn't have been so bad, I guess, if it wasn't for the fact that the set was $75, and the fact that it included a character we already had a year prior. When it comes to Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, I think I'm going to continue to use this one, because unfortunately the official figures left me feeling cold. Number 5, Siren. Hasbro's been doing this weird thing for the last couple of years where they've been putting obviously realistic heads on comic book bodies. I feel like it started with this conjunctivitis version of Marvel Girl, and it makes it look like some kind of mismatched kit bash. Imagine if they did that to Doctor Strange. It might pass muster till you get to the legs. Not only that, but in a baffling choice, it really looks like they modeled it off of Amber Heard. The biggest problem, of course, is that this is a character whose powers are based on her supersonic scream, and she doesn't come with a screaming head. The box art has a screaming head, and it's a fun comic-style design. Hasbro said it was a budget issue and that they're gonna find a way to give us a screaming head, but that just makes me feel like Siren is the new Cannonball. Number 4, Jonathan Kent's Superman. Let me just say from the start, I don't have a problem with Jonathan Kent the character, and I will say there are a few things about this figure I like. One, I love the bright colors of the costume. In that regard, he's a fantastic companion piece to the Hush version of his father. Maybe too good. About 50% of my problem with this figure is the head. Looking at the artwork, Jonathan is usually portrayed as being very warm and kind. So this angry laser eyes interpretation for his very first figure is baffling. Another 25% of my issue is a lack of cape. I know it's not entirely inaccurate, but just do a Google search of Jonathan Kent Superman and pretty much every picture you're going to find has the cape. And that speaks to 12% of another one of my problems, the price. The only brick and mortar stores I could ever find this in were GameStops, and they were always $25. Glancing at all that empty space in the box where a cape should be, it just never felt worth it. To his credit, he does come with extra hands and a flight stand. This leads me to my last 12%. Quality control. I probably saw about 12 different figures throughout the year, and every single one of them had either paint slop or glue globs on the shield and belt. Looking at the shield and rotator cuff, and this one's kinda messy too. He might be called Superman, but this Jonathan Kent is mediocre at best. Number 3, the Batman and Hush 2-pack. As I said in my top 10 Batman video, the biggest offender, of course, were the elbows. I think it's important to reiterate that these were not a mistake. They were like that in the solicitation image, which means that McFarlane Toys were actively trying to get away with it. To McFarlane's credit, though, they did listen to complaints and did try fixing it halfway through. More than a lot of toy companies, I do feel like they listen to their audience and do try to course correct. A good example is how they've cut back on their side-eye, or when I complained about superpowers or the third wave of Batman figures not having peg holes. They fixed that. I'm not trying to take credit for it, but I'm grateful. As for Hush, I was just let down by the fact that it wasn't the version of the character that I wanted. I acknowledge that he did wear a closed trench coat in the comic, but I'm pretty sure I speak for all of us when I say that we were looking for something a lot closer to this. Number 2, Catwoman from The Batman. Zoe Kravitz is a beautiful woman and played a great Selena Kyle. So how on earth did we end up with this cinch-waisted hunchback with a bag over her head? I'm guessing that she's a cat burglar so she can afford her scoliosis surgery. In McFarlane's defense, this might have been what the concept art looked like when they got it, and they did eventually release an updated version, but this is one black cat I definitely don't want crossing my path. She also suffers from the old-style McFarlane ankles. This brings me to the last 1% of my problems with Jonathan Kent. Oh, I'm sorry, did you think that I thought that 50 plus 25 plus 12 plus 12 equaled 100? Anyway, what on earth is going on with these wrists? Clearly the poor boy has some Kryptonian carpal tunnel. Before I reveal my number 1, I do want to spotlight one honorable mention, Gotham Knights Batgirl. I did say if I did a top 10 worst list that she'd be on it, and well, much like the Joker, I'm a man of my word. Having given this figure a proper review, I do appreciate it better than I did at first. At the very least, I'll acknowledge that the costume matches the game and that there's a decent amount of painted detail in there. But of course, I hate the side-eye. Her torso is way too small compared to her lower half and arms. I don't understand why they didn't give her a diaphragm joint. And she's one of the few DC Multiverse figures I have whose peg holes are too small for the foot stand. Also, and this isn't McFarlane's fault, I just don't like this design. Not bad enough to be a top 10, but still I think a fairly worthy honorable mention. And my least favorite figure of 2022 is Bonebreaker Wave Sabretooth. How on earth could we go from the incredible Age of Apocalypse Sabretooth on the Omega Red body to this? Just look at him side by side with this pipsqueak. Now look at them with Wolverine. It wouldn't be so bad, but I've been waiting for this version of Sabretooth for a long time and they just really dropped the ball. The hands are way too disproportionately large and he has these weird Dickensian fingerless gloves. Same thing with the feet. His hair isn't nearly long and crazy enough. It looks like he's swallowing his own teeth. I don't like to be negative. I was so disappointed that I got this Marvel Select version instead. That's a classic Sabretooth. If you want to see a versus, let me know in the comments and I might do a more thorough breakdown, but I'll warn you in advance, I might just get a little savage. I hope you enjoyed my list, and I cannot wait to hear yours in the comments. With so many toy lines I don't personally collect, I'm sure there's lots to talk about. Thanks for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.